Hi guys, thanks for joining. My name's Steve Walls. I'm a licensed counselor here in the state of Colorado. I specialize in the treatment of trauma and all of the associated symptoms and disorders that come from trauma. And I'm here today to talk to you about panic attacks. So panic attacks probably one of my favorite areas to work in, and part of that's because it's probably the area that I see the most success in. Generally speaking, somebody comes in, they've been to the emergency room, they are thinking that they're having a heart attack, they can't breathe, their heart is racing, so they go up to the emergency room and they find out, oh, well, the doctor says, well, your heart's fine, I think you might be having panic attacks. And so then, lo and behold, a little bit down the road, they get a hold of me and we go to work on their panic. So first and foremost, for this video, let's talk about what panic disorder is, or what a panic attack is. So to understand panic, the first thing you've got to understand is the fight or flight response. So fight or flight response is, it's an interesting creature. So basically, let's say that we hear a loud sound or noise, or we're up picking berries in the woods and we hear a branch break behind us, and immediately in a heartbeat we could hear a woman scream, a branch break, anything like that. It's going to activate the fight or flight response. So we're going to start going into a state of distress immediately. Heart rate's going to go up, respiration rate's going to shorten. Now let's say that we hear that branch breaking, we turn around and look and we see that it's a chipmunk. Okay, well, no big deal. We're going to settle back down, the system's going to restore itself. But let's say that you look back and it is a bear. Okay, it's a bear. And then what's going to happen is the brain's really going to kick you into a state. Your heart rate's really going to start pounding fast. Your respiration rate's really going to shorten. You may not even be able to talk because your brain, literally your frontal lobes constrict and you become much more like an animal and much less like a human. During a fight or flight response, these veins and vessels constrict. These veins and vessels get bigger because these are your bigger muscle groups. Your quadriceps get bigger, more full of blood. Your calves and your lower extremities constrict even more, and that's because those lower extremities are most likely to get bit or cut. And these are your muscle groups that you use to fight or flight. So you use your quads to kick or to run, or moms can pick up cars off their kids, if there's been an accident. That's kind of how the fight or flight response works. So we could also include freeze in there, fight, flight, or freeze. So the brain doesn't really get to pick what it's going to do in that situation. You might freeze up and then the bear just sort of keeps on going. You might be like, hey bear, get out of here. And then afterwards you go, God, I can't believe I yelled at that bear. That was kind of dumb, but the bear ran away, so we're good. Or you turn around and run, which is the worst thing you can do with the bear, by the way. But if your primitive mind thinks it's a good idea, you're going to run. And chances are, if you're watching this video, then guess what? Everything worked out as it was supposed to. So primitive mind kind of takes over unless you've had an extensive amount of training to override the fight, flight, or freeze response. But for right now, what I want you to understand is, generally speaking, I'll get somebody in my office, they've been to the emergency room, or they just don't know why. They're just freaking out inside and their heart's beating fast and they having trouble breathing and they're sweating for here and there throughout their days. And what I'm going to tell you is, generally speaking, something happened for that person, and that person went under a high enough level of distress at some point to genuinely, authentically activate the fight, flight, or freeze response. So down the road, what happens is the fight or flight goes kind of haywire on us, and it starts panning over loosely associated things. So if you want to understand more about trauma and how it works, jump back into like my first video on trauma, episode 1, and in there you're going to see a good breakdown of what trauma is. But what I want you to understand is a panic attack is nothing more than an activation of trauma. So it's the fight or flight response activating when it's not supposed to. It is seeing something as a danger to your existence that is not a danger to your existence. So, for example, sometimes people then will not want to drive because driving makes them feel panicky after they've been in a car wreck. Or it might be that they don't want to go on a hike in the woods because last time they were there was a bear. Even though the bear didn't eat them, now it feels anxious and scary to go into the woods. Or it may be that they can't watch TV or animal documentaries anymore because it makes them flash back on when they saw the bear, and then they go into a fight or flight response. So that's one reason we panic, is it's because the brain has this loosely paired information that it's now activating the response with. The other reason is just too much stuff, like trauma on trauma on trauma on trauma. And then we start to go into distress. Or like we've got a bad job and we've been there for years, the brain starts to atrophy. Or a harsh marriage or an ugly marriage. And now the brain is just panicking all the time. And it's going to continue to do that until we either change jobs or address what's going on here to get things right to where the job's more comfortable. Or, we leave our spouses, set boundaries with our spouses, or clean up the stuff in our head about our spouses. It just depends on the scenario. A panic attack is nothing more than the fight, flight, or freeze response gone haywire. At that point, the brain becomes more primitive. The heart starts racing. It's hard to breathe. We sweat, so we're slippery if somebody grabs us. These veins and vessels constrict, the frontal lobes constrict, and all the mass blood flow here in the central part of the brain and lower part of the brain. So for now, just understand that that's what a panic attack is. We've identified I'm having panic attacks. So what's the first thing that I should do? Well, the first thing you should do is educate yourself. The second thing that you should do is you should absolutely learn some breathing techniques or some skills and tools to help ground you. So, as an example, I could take this little case that I've got here, right? I could feel the temperature and the texture of this case. I could smell the inside of it and see what it smells like. Don't make it good or bad, just notice what it smells like. I could turn the zipper and see what it sounds like when I zip it. Right? So I know that that's very simple, but find some things around you, grab them. Is it hard or soft? Is it hot or cold? Does it make any sounds when I shake it? This has a little rattle to it. I don't know if you can hear that. But, I might look at it and say it's a black oval-shaped apparatus. It's actually something I use for EMDR with a plug end in it. And it's got metal in the middle, surrounded by hard plastic. I might smell it. It kind of smells neutral, like nothing. So I might notice the temperature, the texture. Is it hard or soft? Does it have any smells? Does it make any sounds? And what do I see when I look at it? Well, I see that it's got a couple of screws in it. It's got an AV jack in it. And so what this does is this incorporates all the senses. You can ground with anything. This is one from Stephen Porges that I got. And it is the mindful sip of water. So you take your cup, you feel the temperature, you smell, and you notice the smell, the mindful sip of water. So you notice the smell and the neutrality of the water. You take it, you put it up to your lip. You notice how the texture and the temperature of the cup as your lip touches it. You take a little sip. You move it around in your mouth. You notice the temperature, the flavorlessness of the water, the neutrality. And then I want you to swallow it down. And as you swallow it down, just follow it down into your belly. What that does is that creates a neutral state in your mind. So neutral states are super important for us throughout the day to bring our stress back to neutral. One of the mistakes that people make a lot of the time is they try to go for positive. Well, blood in the brain is elastic, so if you pull it away from an area too far and you get it into bliss or ecstasy or like really high levels, it's elastic. So boom, it's kind of like having a rubber band and pulling it further and further from the central parts of the brain, and then it snaps back. So what you want to shoot for is not highly positive. You want to shoot for neutral, maybe slightly positive, right? Neutral to slightly positive. People, when they are dealing with anxiety or panic, they start pleasure seeking, and that's the worst thing you can do. Or you could go with like some of the drugs that are out there. Sometimes people start using the drugs. Boom, some of those drugs bring that blood way up here towards the third eye region, right? Like, that's not good either. So what you really want is just things that are, neutral. They kind of get in, kind of edge into the prefrontal cortex, executive functioning happening, good stuff happening in the brain. So that's one that people can do throughout the day, right? Takes 15 to 30 seconds, and you just ground yourself. Another really good one is just to sit and plant both your feet flat on the floor. Put your fingers together. Notice the temperature of the room. Notice the sounds you hear. Smell the air. Notice that any smells you smell, they're not good or bad. Notice, then maybe close your eyes. Notice the rise and fall of your chest. Take a few breaths. Those are grounding exercises. So that's one way to help cope with panic. Those are things that we need to do. All of us need to do these things throughout the day. They really help our brain function at a more optimized level. But for people who are having panic attacks or who have panic disorder, I'm going to say that it's pretty important that we do that. Another good one would be counting backwards from 99 in threes. And I know that sounds silly, but what you're going to do is you're going to make the blood move out of the stress centers and into the math center, right? It's going to move up a little bit. So when that occurs, you're going to be in the right part of your brain. And so when you count backwards from 99 in threes, 99, 96, 93, 90, 87, 84. You don't have to go all the way to 0. Just do it long enough to kind of get the blood working in there again. So those are 3 key things that you can do to start dealing with it. Now I'm going to talk about the next one, and this one's the one that really gets to the nitty-gritty of everything, and that would be Socratic Method. So basically, Socrates made an entire government look like complete fools using 2 words, if then. If blank, then blank. So most people who are having a panic attack, let's say that it's got like a agoraphobic type component to it. So they walk into Walmart and they start feeling like they're in danger. So basically in a situation like that, the brain is saying, if I go into Walmart, which is the only place in our town really to get a lot of household goods. If I walk into Walmart, then I'm going to be in danger. Then I could die. Those are usually some of the irrational thoughts that are going through our head. That is the voice of your primitive mind. Remember, your primitive mind is no different than a rat, a cat, a horny toad, a killer whale. Well, dogs are scared of thunder. Like sometimes when you're safe in your house and there's nothing to worry about, some dogs are scared of thunder. Some dogs aren't. And I've had lots of dogs and it kind of varies from dog to dog. But what you'll find is our more primitive part of our mind activates anytime we see something that doesn't make sense. Anytime that the fight or flight activates, there's something primitive about that. So you're in your primitive mind, not in your human mind, your frontal lobe mind. So not where math, art, and science are stored. You're more back there in those primitive qualities that are going, I'm in danger. I can't go in there. I'm going to die if I go in there. I'm going to die if I drive my car today. I'm going to die if I get in the car with somebody today. Unless the person that you're driving with is a complete maniac, or your truck is falling apart and it's, you're going to wreck it. Or there's a gunman at the Walmart that you just heard about. So those would be times when, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Or it does make a lot of sense to not go into those places or expose yourself to those things. But if everything's safe and your mathematical, scientific brain looks at it and goes, there's nothing dangerous here, well, then guess what? You need to start working on getting back into those routines. And you've got to start challenging your beliefs with if-then. If I'm going into Walmart, I'm in danger. If I get in my truck and drive it, then I could die. If I ride with somebody in a vehicle, then I could be toast. Well, so now that you have identified, okay, I'm going to die. So is that true? That's the next question you want to ask yourself. So if then, okay, is that true? No, people go into Walmart all the time. No, people drive their cars all the time. I've drove my car for the last, 35 years, and I haven't killed myself in a car crash. So it's pretty safe for me to drive my car. Or I've rode with this person 100 times. They're a safe driver. I'm safe to drive with this person. So you've got to start arguing with your primitive mind. Your frontal lobes have to start to counteract what your primitive mind is telling it. So use Socratic Method to counter the distorted thought that's in your mind that says I could die, unless it makes sense. I'm having a panic attack about walking down a dark alley where people have been mugged and murdered. Okay, well, that makes sense. Don't go down dark alleyways where people have been mugged and murdered unless you absolutely have no other choice. That's how the fight or flight response is supposed to work, right? Versus it's broad daylight, I can't walk down the street in a very safe area. Okay, well, now we're looking at panic attack, okay? So just sort of keep that in mind. It can be, and the stuff that can activate panic can also be social trauma, and I don't want to leave that undiscussed in our time here. So keep in mind that we all have pre-recorded software. And in that software, it basically says mammals need other mammals to exist. Okay? So if we're all part of a tribe 300 years ago, let's say that it's a kid who's panicking about going to school. Well, let's say they're getting picked on at school. Let's say they're having trouble fitting in at school. Well, mammals need other mammals to exist. So that kid in the most primitive part of his mind is going, I don't belong to the tribe. Well, what happens to people who don't belong with the tribe 200-300 years ago? They either get cast out of the tribe or they get a tomahawk upside the head. Like that's how it's going to go down. So you've got to keep that stuff in mind. Like the primitive parts of our mind have not adapted to modern day conveniences and safeties. So the primitive part of your mind doesn't know the difference. It just knows if people are getting disrespectful with that part of the mind that, or with that person, that they could be in danger. So it feels very dangerous to a person sometimes to go into social situations. It might even be that the person is anxious and panicky about going to work. Well, work is an even more complex creature, because then you've got the social piece to it, but then you've also got, let's say you're having friction with the boss. Well, what happens if you get fired? Well, there goes your food, water, shelter, right? And depending on the person, well, maybe even like their ability to keep or maintain or attract a mate, right? So we got to look at this in kind of an evolutionary psychology basis. That is the primitive mind of panic. So the way through that is to say, okay, primitive mind, I get what you're saying, that I'm in danger of losing my job, but, and pissing off the tribe and getting tomahawked upside the head, but I don't live 300 years ago. I'm not part of a tribe. I go to work. If somebody's mad at me, they're mad at me, but I got to pay the bills, because that's going to increase my likelihood of being able to have food, water, shelter, reproduction. Okay? So sometimes you can have a conversation with the primitive parts of your mind. Your frontal lobes talk to the middle parts of your mind, and sometimes it'll play nice. Now let's say all of this stuff, and none of this stuff always is like airtight, works every time, but these are good things for you to start practicing and start trying. So let's say that those things are helping a little, but they're not helping a lot. That brings us to the next part of this, which is talking about therapy. Okay? So there's a couple of people that I would recommend. For me, I'm certified in the evidence-based treatment of panic disorder, and I also do EMDR. I have obsessed about EMDR since 1999, 1998, and it is my go-to therapy in here for people who are having panic attacks. 9 out of 10 times, the person was in a car wreck, they lost a pet, and it was a gruesome death. Somebody around them died, or they saw somebody die or get severely injured. Things like that can kick on the panic inside of us. Also, even breakups, divorces, catching somebody cheating on us. They activate the fight or flight response. The brain becomes primitive and it loosely associates things in with it. And now we don't feel like everything feels really panicky and anxious. So for that part, what I would recommend is that you find a good therapist who does EMDR and who specializes in panic. For me in here, I'm going to say, like, in the last year, I don't think I've had a single person who was having a panic attacks that we weren't able to take care of that problem for them. EMDR is a very unique process. We're going to get into that in some videos down the road, so be looking for those. Do me a favor and do your, if you enjoyed this video and this is something that's useful to you, I want you to know that you can subscribe to this channel, and if you do so, then you're going to be able to get notifications when you jump into YouTube that lets you know that I've got a new video that's been uploaded. I'm going to be doing about a video a week, and some of those I'll be fishing and some of those I'll be sitting in my office, and we're just going to go from there. Anyways, guys, I want to thank you guys for tuning in. I want to kind of summarize. So you can do the mindful sip of water. You can do grounding techniques. You can count backwards from 99 in threes. You could use Socratic Method and if-then to override and begin to argue with your primitive parts of your mind to settle down when you're in a fight or flight situation. And to think about looking into some therapy that relates to panic and treating trauma, such as EMDR therapy with the therapist in your area.